During World War II, there was a soil secret so effective that gardens treated with it once produced 3 times more than gardens fertilized every week. No chemicals, no factories, no supply shipments. Just knowledge passed between victory gardeners in handwritten letters and scribbled on recipe cards by families who knew that forgetting meant starving. Gardens built with these liquids grew vegetables in soil that had been declared dead. Plots that hadn't produced anything in years suddenly exploded with growth after a single application. Families in occupied territories fed themselves from ground that German soldiers had salted and poisoned. The secret wasn't expensive fertilizer. It wasn't rare ingredients. It was understanding how soil actually works. And for 80 years, this knowledge has been systematically forgotten, not because it stopped working, because it threatened a fertilizer industry worth $242 billion, because you cannot sell plant food to people who brew it for free, because you cannot patent a recipe that anyone can make from garbage. Today, fertilizer companies don't want you to know these liquids exist, because if gardeners realize that kitchen scraps beat factory chemicals, that free recipes defeat expensive products, and that dead soil revived correctly grows food without any purchases, their entire business model would collapse. But the truth can't stay buried forever. In this video, we're uncovering 10 World War II soil revival liquids that modern agriculture deliberately forgot. Liquids that still work better than anything you can buy. Liquids that cost nothing, require no repeat purchases, and bring dead soil back to life when everything else fails. By the end, you'll understand why your grandparents never bought fertilizer, and you'll know exactly how to make what they made. In the desperate spring of 1943, victory gardeners faced a crisis that modern gardeners have never experienced. Commercial fertilizer didn't exist for home use. Every ounce of synthetic nitrogen was being shipped to farms or converted into explosives. 20 million families needed to grow food and had nothing to feed their soil. The solution came from farmers who remembered what their grandparents knew. Finished compost was placed in burlap sacks and submerged in barrels of water. The mixture sat for 3 days, stirred occasionally. The resulting brown liquid contained something that would take science decades to fully understand. Billions of living microorganisms suspended in water, not just nutrients, life itself. The bacteria in compost tea colonize dead soil within hours of application. They begin breaking down organic matter that's been locked away for years. They convert unavailable minerals into forms plant roots can absorb. They create the biological activity that separates living soil from sterile dirt. Victory gardeners reported results that seemed impossible. Soil that had grown nothing for years produced record harvests after a single compost tea application. Gardens that required weekly fertilizing suddenly needed nothing at all. The tea didn't just feed plants, it taught the soil to feed itself. The ratio was simple: 1 part finished compost to 5 parts water. Brew for 24 to 72 hours. Strain and apply directly to soil. One application introduced organisms that multiplied on their own for years. Modern fertilizers feed plants while starving soil biology. Each application creates more dependency on the next application. The soil becomes an addict, unable to function without its chemical fix. Compost tea does the opposite. It builds independence with every application. The soil becomes more fertile, not less. Eventually, you stop applying anything because the soil no longer needs help. The fertilizer industry saw this coming. After the war, they spent millions convincing gardeners that homemade solutions were primitive, unscientific, unreliable. They positioned their factory chemicals as modern and necessary. The tea kept working, the knowledge kept being buried, and gardeners kept buying what they could brew for free. Before synthetic nitrogen existed, every farm in the world fertilized with animal manure. The practice was universal because it worked universally. Then factories started producing nitrogen from natural gas, and a 10,000-year tradition was abandoned within a single generation. World War II brought it back. Soldiers stationed on European farms watched local families collect manure from every animal: cows, horses, chickens, rabbits, goats. Nothing was wasted. But they weren't spreading raw manure on gardens. They were brewing it. The technique was called manure tea, though the name made American soldiers uncomfortable. Aged manure was placed in cloth sacks and suspended in water barrels. The brewing took 1 to 2 weeks. The liquid that resulted was diluted and applied to garden soil. The transformation was visible within days. Plants that had been struggling suddenly stood upright. Yellow leaves turned to green. Root systems expanded visibly when plants were pulled for inspection. The soil itself changed color, darkening as biological activity increased. The science was simple but profound. Manure tea delivers nutrients in forms immediately available to plants. But more importantly, it delivers the bacteria that make soil function. Organisms that break down organic matter. Organisms that convert nitrogen from air. Organisms that create the underground ecosystem plants depend on. Different animals produced different benefits. Chicken manure tea was highest in nitrogen. Cow manure tea was perfectly balanced. Horse manure tea excelled in potassium. Rabbit manure tea was so gentle it could be applied without dilution. The The brewing process eliminated the dangers of raw manure. Harmful pathogens died in the aerobic conditions. Nutrients that would burn plants in raw form became gentle in solution. The dangerous aspects disappeared while the benefits concentrated. After the war, the fertilizer industry positioned manure as primitive, dangerous, unsanitary. They funded research emphasizing pathogen risks while ignoring the brewing process that eliminated them. Farms still produce billions of tons of manure annually. Most becomes a waste disposal problem. The free fertilizer that built agriculture for 10,000 years sits unused because someone profits when you buy instead of brew. Coastal communities during the Second World War had access to something inland families didn't: fish processing waste, heads, guts, bones, scales, material so foul-smelling that disposal was a constant problem. Someone discovered it was the most powerful soil amendment on Earth. Fish emulsion is made by fermenting fish waste in water for several weeks. The smell is horrific. The results are miraculous. Soldiers stationed in fishing villages watched gardens grow with a vigor they'd never seen anywhere else. The explanation involves both chemistry and biology. Fish waste contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in perfect ratios. It contains calcium for cell walls and magnesium for chlorophyll. It contains trace minerals from ocean depths that land soils lost centuries ago. But fish emulsion contains something else: growth hormones. Fish produce natural compounds that stimulate cell division and rapid growth. These compounds survive the fermentation process intact. Plants treated with fish emulsion don't just receive nutrition. They receive chemical signals that accelerate every growth process. Victory gardeners near coastlines reported yields that seemed like exaggeration. Tomato plants producing 50 pounds instead of 15. Squash vines covering twice their normal area. Root vegetables twice normal size at half normal growing time. The recipe spread through letters and word of mouth. Inland gardeners requested fish waste from coastal relatives. The material being thrown away became the most valuable amendment anyone had ever used. The process was simple but smelly. Fill a container 1/3 full with fish waste, cover with water. Allow to ferment for 2 to 4 weeks. Strain the liquid. Dilute 10-to-1 with water. Apply to soil. One application at planting produced effects lasting the entire season. Plants grew faster, produced more, and resisted disease better than plants fed with anything synthetic. After the war, chemical companies couldn't compete with free fish guts, so they made fish emulsion seem disgusting, primitive, something only desperate people would use. They marketed clean, odorless crystals that cost money and worked worse. The fishing industry still produces millions of tons of waste annually. Most goes to landfills. The free fertilizer that outperforms everything gets thrown away because the fertilizer industry needs it thrown away. Stinging nettles are considered weeds. Farmers poison them. Gardeners curse them. Anyone who touches them regrets it for hours. World War II changed how people looked at this despised plant. Nettles accumulate nitrogen at concentrations that rival any fertilizer. European resistance members hiding in forests discovered this by accident. They had no access to fertilizer. They had no access to manure. They had only wild plants and the knowledge to use them. Nettles were harvested with gloves and stuffed into barrels. Water was added. The mixture fermented for 2 to 3 weeks, releasing a smell that could be detected hundreds of feet away. The liquid that resulted was diluted and applied to hidden garden plots. The plants exploded with growth. Nettle tea contains nitrogen levels approaching 5%. For comparison, most finished compost contains less than 2%. The tea delivers this nitrogen in forms plants absorb immediately. Growth response is visible within 48 hours, but nitrogen is only part of the story. Nettles also accumulate iron, magnesium, calcium, and dozens of trace minerals. Their deep roots mine nutrients from subsoil layers that shallow-rooted plants can't reach. When nettles decompose in water, they release everything they've collected. The recipe was standardized through trial and error. 1 kilogram of nettles per 10 liters of water. Ferment until bubbling stops, usually 2 to 3 weeks. Dilute 10-to-1 before application. Apply to soil weekly during heavy growth periods. Resistance gardens hidden in forests produced enough vegetables to supplement diets when no other food was available. The same weed that farmers spent money killing became the foundation of survival. After the war, herbicide companies needed nettles to remain enemies. They marketed chemicals to kill them. They never mentioned that the plants being poisoned were worth more than the products being sold. Nettles still grow everywhere. They still accumulate nitrogen. They still make free fertilizer. And gardeners still spend money killing them while buying nitrogen they could harvest for nothing. Farmers near coastlines have used seaweed for centuries. The practice was so valuable that medieval laws regulated who could collect it from beaches. World War II brought this ancient knowledge to families who had never seen an ocean. Seaweed contains something that no land-based fertilizer can provide: the complete mineral profile of the ocean. More than 60 trace elements exist in seaweed: zinc, boron, manganese, molybdenum, copper, cobalt, elements that plants need in tiny amounts but cannot grow properly without. elements that have been depleted from farmland through centuries of extraction. Chemical fertilizers contain 3 nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. 3 out of 60, 5% of what plants actually require. Seaweed provides the other 95%. Soldiers stationed in coastal Britain watched local farmers collect seaweed after every storm. The material was piled in barrels, covered with water, and left to decompose. The resulting liquid was applied to gardens that had been cultivated for hundreds of years without depletion. The British Agricultural Ministry studied these farms and found something remarkable. Soil mineral levels remained stable generation after generation. Crops showed none of the deficiency symptoms common in chemically fertilized fields. The seaweed was replacing what crops removed, maintaining perfect balance indefinitely. But seaweed does something even more important. It contains natural growth hormones called cytokinins that stimulate cell division. Plants treated with seaweed solution grow faster at the cellular level, not just more nutrients, faster growth. The recipe varied by region, but followed common principles. Fresh or dried seaweed was soaked in fresh water for several weeks. The liquid was diluted and applied to soil or sprayed on leaves. Application frequency ranged from weekly to monthly depending on growing conditions. After the war, seaweed products were commercialized and sold at premium prices. $40 to $60 per gallon for liquid that anyone near a coast could make for free. The industry created a product from something that washed up on beaches. Seaweed still washes ashore after every storm. It still contains 60 trace minerals. It still costs nothing to collect, and gardeners still buy bottles of it while beaches remain covered in free supply. Here's the recipe that threatens the entire fertilizer industry. Plant food made from plants you're trying to eliminate. The weeds in your garden are concentrated fertility waiting to be reclaimed. Every weed growing in your soil contains nutrients it extracted from that soil. When you pull weeds and throw them away, you're throwing away fertility that your garden needs. World War II families were too desperate to waste anything. They turned their enemies into allies. The process couldn't be simpler. Pull weeds, stuff them in a bucket, cover with water, weight them down so they stay submerged. Wait 2 to 3 weeks. Strain the liquid, dilute, and apply. The tea that results contains exactly what your specific soil provided to those specific weeds. Dandelions bring up calcium and potassium from deep soil layers. Lamb's quarters concentrate nitrogen. Dock accumulates iron. Plantain mines minerals that nothing else can reach. When you apply weed tea, you're returning nutrients in precisely the ratios your soil contains. Custom fertilizer for your exact conditions. No soil test required. No calculation needed. The weeds already did the analysis. Victory gardeners who used weed tea noticed something unexpected. Their weed problems decreased over time. The explanation is elegant. Healthy, balanced soil grows fewer weeds. Weed tea helps balance soil. Balanced soil reduces weeds. The solution to weeds is making tea from weeds. The fertilizer industry cannot sell you weeds, so they positioned weeds as enemies. Pull them. Poison them. Eliminate them at any cost. Never consider that they might be resources instead of problems. The herbicide industry generates $34 billion annually from killing weeds. The fertilizer industry generates $242 billion from feeding plants. Both industries collapse when you make tea from what grows for free. In 1943, a British researcher named Makoto Kawase was studying why some plant cuttings rooted easily while others died. His research uncovered something that should have ended an entire industry overnight. Willow trees produce natural rooting hormone in their bark. The compound is called indole-butyric acid. It's the exact same chemical sold in commercial rooting products. But willows produce it in concentrations high enough to affect any plant. Soak willow branches in water and that water becomes liquid rooting hormone. Free. World War II. Gardeners discovered this independently through desperation. Commercial rooting compounds weren't available. Nurseries were closed. Gardeners needed to propagate plants from cuttings but had no products to help roots form. Someone remembered folk knowledge about willow water. They tried it. It worked better than anything they'd ever purchased. The recipe required only willow branches and time. Young branches were cut into 1-inch pieces. The pieces were soaked in water for 24 to 48 hours. The liquid was strained and used immediately. Cuttings soaked in willow water before planting rooted in half the normal time. Seeds watered with willow solution germinated faster and stronger. Transplants treated with willow water established without shock. But willow water does something beyond root stimulation. The hormones promote overall plant growth. Vegetables watered with willow solution at transplanting grew measurably larger all season. One application created effects lasting months. The rooting hormone industry generates over $1 billion annually. Every bottle sold is a bucket of willow water that wasn't made. After the war, the industry needed gardeners to forget that willows exist. So they marketed convenience, time savings, reliability. They never mentioned that the product in their bottles grew on trees. Willows still grow along every stream and pond. They still produce rooting hormone. They still provide it for free. And gardeners still buy what they could brew overnight. Korean and Japanese farmers developed a technique centuries ago that American soldiers discovered during the Pacific War. A liquid fertilizer so concentrated that vegetables treated with it grew visibly faster within 24 hours. Fermented plant juice uses fast-growing plants as the base. Comfrey, nettles, weeds, any vegetation with rapid growth. The plant material is mixed with equal parts brown sugar by weight. The sugar feeds fermentation. Beneficial microorganisms multiply. The plant material breaks down into concentrated liquid nutrition. The resulting juice contains everything the original plants contained, but in forms immediately available to roots. Growth hormones, concentrated nutrients. Billions of beneficial bacteria, all preserved and multiplied by fermentation. American soldiers watched Korean farmers grow vegetables without any purchased inputs. No fertilizer, no pesticides, no seed treatments, just fermented juice from plants that grew wild. The gardens produced more than chemically fertilized fields, not by small margins, by double or triple. The technique spread through agricultural circles after the war. Then it stopped spreading. Here's why. Fermented plant juice can be made from weeds. The plants that farmers pay to eliminate become the most effective fertilizer. A farmer using this technique needs nothing from anyone. Complete independence from agricultural supply chains. The industry cannot tolerate independence. So fermented plant juice remained a secret known only to organic farmers and traditional growers. Mainstream agriculture pretended it didn't exist. The recipe takes minimal effort. Harvest fast-growing plants in the morning. Weigh them. Mix with equal weight of brown sugar. Pack into a container. Cover with cloth. Wait 7 to 10 days. Strain the liquid. Dilute 1,000 to 1 with water. Apply to soil or spray on leaves. One batch treats an entire garden for a season. The ingredients cost nothing. The results exceed anything you can buy. Earthworms process organic matter through their digestive systems and excrete the most perfect plant food ever analyzed. Worm castings contain nutrients in precisely the forms roots absorb. They contain beneficial bacteria in concentrations no other material matches. They contain growth hormones that stimulate plant development. World War II, gardeners who kept worm bins discovered that the liquid draining from those bins was even more powerful than the castings themselves. Worm tea is made by soaking worm castings in water and aerating the mixture. Air keeps the beneficial organisms alive and multiplying. After 24 to 48 hours of brewing, the liquid contains billions of bacteria per teaspoon. When this tea is applied to dead soil, the transformation is almost immediate. Biological activity begins within hours. The organisms in worm tea don't just add fertility, they create the conditions for fertility to develop on its own. One application introduces bacteria that continue multiplying for years. The soil becomes a living system instead of a sterile medium. Plants tap into a biological network that feeds them continuously. Victory gardeners called it liquid life. They applied it to their worst soil and watched problems disappear. Clay that wouldn't drain began draining. Sand that wouldn't hold water began holding it. Dead dirt became living soil. The fertilizer industry has no response to worm tea. They cannot patent earthworms. They cannot control what worms produce. They can only hope you never discover what a bucket of worm castings and an aquarium pump can do. After the war, vermicomposting remained a fringe practice. The industry made sure it stayed that way. They promoted products. They ignored organisms. They sold solutions to problems that worms solve for free. Earthworms still process organic matter. They still produce castings. They still create the most perfect plant food on Earth. And most gardeners have never made tea from what worms give away. These weren't just gardening recipes. They were survival strategies developed by people who would starve if they got it wrong. No garden centers, no fertilizer deliveries, no backup systems. Just kitchen scraps, weeds, and the knowledge to transform them into life. And here's what the fertilizer industry doesn't want you to understand. These methods aren't outdated, they're superior. A garden fed with living liquids becomes more fertile every year. A garden dependent on chemicals becomes more depleted. Our grandparents built soil that's still productive today. We're mining fertility that took generations to accumulate. Modern agriculture forgot these liquids because forgetting made corporations money. Every free recipe buried is a product sold. Every gardener dependent on purchases is a customer retained. The industry profits from your ignorance. For 80 years, they've been winning. Fertilizer sales have increased every decade. Soil health has declined across every continent. Dependency on purchased inputs has become total, but knowledge can't be killed forever. Compost still breeds bacteria. Fish still contain growth hormones. Willows still produce rooting compound. The free recipes that built victory gardens still work exactly as they always have. The next time fertilizer prices spike, two kinds of gardeners will exist. Those panicking because they can't afford what they need, and those brewing what they need from materials that cost nothing. If this knowledge matters to you, subscribe now. Share this with everyone still buying fertilizer they could make. Because the liquids your grandparents brewed are still the liquids that work. Make a bucket this week. Revive some dead soil, and never depend on fertilizer companies again. I'll see you in the next video.